So what is the Harvard Forest? The scene is quintessential New England. 4,000 acres of rolling hills, varied forests of oak and pine and birch and beech and maple, deep valleys with streams coursing through them, vistas that look off to the White Mountains and the landscapes beyond, open fields with pastures and cows on them, much like almost any part of New England. But it's the unseen pieces that make it so special, that we've studied it for 120 years, that we've cared for it, that we've got instrumentation wires running through the woods that yield information that build on that history, that make it a unique forest, a unique ecosystem, and a unique laboratory for science and for our work. It's best to think of our work as kind of crossing a wide range of scales. So we sit in a time when the globe is changing. The major question is, how will that play out? How does it play out in a landscape, a particular landscape like that in New England? Many different scales of density of humans, a wide variety of forest conditions. What is the response of individual organisms, individual forests within a given landscape like that of the Harvard Forest? So the forest was founded with really quite a unique mission. It was to immerse faculty, students, a wide range of researchers in nature, but in nature that involved people, and where they could study the way that that operated on a day-to-day basis, living the life rather than just traveling out on weekends to experience it episodically. The idea was to start that work and then to continue it for an indefinite period of time. So beginning in 1907 and coming through to the present, to create what is really the world's most thoroughly studied and longest studied forest ecosystem. So the New England landscape yields one of the world's greatest environmental stories. It's a story that starts in the early 1600s with the arrival of colonists, the broad-scale deforestation of the landscape for agriculture to support newly established populations of immigrants that are coming to the land, peaking in the mid-19th century when agriculture then shifted to other parts of the United States, and New Englanders moving basically into industrial towns, allowing much of the former agricultural land to go back naturally to forest. Those forests are now what comprise 82 or so % of the New England landscape, and have come back and are growing in a thriving way, which provide the basis for all the research that we do today. So that early history of research both looked back in time to understand how kind of modern conditions had been shaped and started to accumulate a long record of change that led to really an unexcelled archive of information about the Harvard Forest. It's that kind of record which helped to shape the thinking of the individuals who conceived of the National Science Foundation LTER program, and which ultimately led to the Harvard Forest being selected as one of the member institutions within that program.
In the late 70s, there was a meeting at the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole to discuss the possibility of setting up a long-term ecological research program at the National Science Foundation. It was the time the issue of human alteration of the global carbon cycle, people actually changing the way the Earth is functioning, was becoming a major concern to the scientific community and also to decision makers around the world. There was a movement to institutionalize some longer-term assessments of the climate change issue. We spent almost a week together talking about the pros and the cons, how you'd set one up, what long-term really meant. If you had multiple sites, would you be measuring the same thing at each place, etc. In order to understand the impacts of climate change on the environment and society, you really needed to conduct long-term studies.
The Harvard Forest is one of 28 long-term ecological research sites spread throughout the U.S. It's located in central Massachusetts, about 70 miles west of main campus in Cambridge. The Harvard Forest is a department within Harvard University, and the LTER is a long-term grant from the National Science Foundation, but in many ways they've become inseparable. The Long-Term Ecological Research Network has been funded by NSF since 1980, and we joined the network in 1988, so we're celebrating 30 years as part of this really exclusive and exceptional group of sites that are dedicated to understanding the way nature changes over the long term. With our museum and with several faculty who are as much historians as they are ecologists, we have this incredible record of long-term change in forest development. It provides a magnet for additional researchers to come here and add value to the data sets that we've been collecting, and then in turn we build on those data sets. We're also home to the National Ecological Observatory Network, or NEON, which is another national ecological program. We host a Forest Global Earth Observatory plot through which hundreds of thousands of trees are remeasured every 5 years. I don't think any of those other programs would have settled here if it weren't for the LTER. It has a magnetic pull for researchers to come visit the Harvard Forest. The funding from the LTER helps pay for the infrastructure. We warm the soils and it keeps the heat on. We measure the carbon flux through large towers, and it pays technicians to climb up those towers every time it gets hit by lightning and we need to replace the equipment. We have 4,000 acres and those have roads and fences to maintain. Plus it pays postdocs and researchers and all the things to make this big research enterprise tick. It just couldn't happen without the LTER.
There are lots of examples of work that we're doing today that builds very explicitly off the history of research here. One classic example is the story of the Pisgah Forest, an old-growth forest that was first identified by Richard Fisher in the very early 1900s, studied by his students, conserved by him as part of the Harvard Forest, and then used as a model for understanding the way that forests operate naturally. That forest blew down in the 1938 hurricane, and rather than salvage or log it afterwards for the value of the timber, the director of the Harvard Forest chose to leave it as a living laboratory to study how it would recover following such a apparently catastrophic impact. We still study that forest, and the records, they go back to the early 1900s of what it was like before the hurricane, and then how that forest has recovered and has regrown into actually what's a quite different kind of forest, provides us with insights into the dynamics of nature that are unrivaled in terms of what one could get by just going out and starting a project today.
Every year at the Harvard Forest, we host about 100 different research projects. So as the field site coordinator, I know a little bit about all of those. And they range from everything from a graduate student visiting a bunch of LTER sites and collecting one soil sample from each, to major installations and experiments like our soil warming experiment that's been running for more than 25 years, requires inline electricity, and is really the poster child for why long-term research is so important, because the trends and conclusions that we've drawn from that experiment have changed drastically over 25 years. One of my favorite studies is called the Lyford plot. It's a 3-acre patch of forest that in the 1960s, a soil scientist here named Walter Lyford set up this site in his backwoods on Harvard Forest and mapped and measured every single tree. We've gone back about every decade since. So we're 50 years into this study, and it's becoming more and more valuable as we can understand how the forest is developing over time.
Forests operate on a whole different timescale than people do. And so to understand how forests develop over time, you need 30-year-long data sets. Indeed, you need 50-year-long data sets. We're committed to understanding how forests develop. These forests at Harvard Forest are 100 to 120 years old, and they're just reaching their prime. In fact, they've never grown so fast. And every year we're surprised about what we're learning.
The forest is a beautiful place where students from all over the world, of all ages, come and learn things that they could never learn inside the walls of a classroom. Many of the students that we work with come here for a short time, but then they stay engaged with us for decades. And so the idea of long-term ecological research also is long-term ecological engagement with a range of people.
So the first time I came out here, it was the dead of winter, at least as I recall. There was snow on the ground, and most of what we did out here seemed to be wander around the woods following either David Foster or David Orwig as they walked around describing what we were seeing. And that was sort of the first time that I had ever done that, I think, really walked around a forest with somebody who knew so much about it. You walk through the forest with David Foster and he starts describing what the landscape looked like over the last several hundred years. And suddenly, as if by magic, you're next to a stone wall. And he said, this is a stone wall, and you can tell that, this was a stone wall for pasture. 200 years ago, there were pastures here, and now it's dominated by these big red oak trees. And so I was really enchanted by walking around in the forest, at least sort of for the first hour or so until I was frigidly cold. But after that experience, I wanted to spend as much time as I possibly could during my undergraduate career out at the Harvard Forest.
The Harvard Forest has had an REU program, so that's research experience for undergraduates, since at least 1993. That's when we first got funding from the National Science Foundation. Now we have 20 to 30 undergraduates from across the country come and do mentored research with people who are based at Harvard Forest and our research collaborators. And it's an amazing program. The students form cohorts and networks that support each other as they navigate their careers going forward.
I was a Harvard Forest REU student in 2010, and I was a student working at the Eddy Covariance Tower, which has been running since 1991, which is the same year that I was born. My project was looking at understory plants and how the community and the carbon storage and fluxes in those plants has changed over time. For me, I was 18, feeling like I was contributing to this globally important project. It's not just that you're doing your summer project and then it's gonna go sit on a shelf somewhere and not matter to anybody, but you're really contributing to these projects in a meaningful way. And part of that is contributing to the long-term records and all of the baseline data that gets taken. But the other part is that you're comparing what you found to what previous students found, and future students will look at what you found. You really feel like you're part of the scientific community, even as an undergraduate student, which is awesome.
The spirit of collaboration at Harvard Forest is like nowhere else that I've ever worked. Collaboration is probably the most important thing in my mind to being a scientist. We are long past the era where someone can kind of sit in their bubble and think alone and come to brilliant ideas. Almost every good idea that I've had in my early career as a scientist has come from talking with someone else. Just as David has said many times, that if we share and we bring people into this infrastructure, that we all end up better for it. That if other people come and do experiments here, it doesn't compromise the experiments that are going on. It makes them more interesting, and it gives us opportunities to look across interactions we wouldn't otherwise be able to. And so I think that openness, that willingness to discuss, to share, and to take whatever criticism comes with that and use it to better science rather than be afraid of it, I think that's the reason that I love working here. It's the reason that I make the trip from Boston as often as I can, because I've never been anywhere that collaborates quite like Harvard Forest and all the LTER scientists.
I came here as a freshman in college, and basically since that moment, the people who have been here have been only encouraging. I'm someone who didn't necessarily expect to become a scientist or to become a forest ecologist, certainly not that. And so this has been a place that has really helped to foster a welcoming atmosphere, and that has been an important part of the success of the Harvard Forest.
The LTER program funds sites on 6-year cycles. And so we just began what we call LTER 6, and we're entering our 30th year. The focus of LTER 6 will be on scaling from microbial systems living in the soil all the way up to the macro system of New England and its ecology, as we understand that from remote sensing and simulation models.
So now that we're into LTR 6, beyond our 30th year of the LTR program at Harvard Forest, I'm really excited for the overall framework of tying site-based to regional studies. We're getting better at putting the field-based science and the modeling together. And the thing that I'm personally most excited about is our research on the hemlock woolly adelgid and hemlock, so this invasive insect that's killing a particular species of tree in the woods, and expanding that to other systems. I'll be working on some research looking at the long-term effects of gypsy moth defoliation on oak forests.
So one of the most important spin-offs of our historical research and our scientific research has come together in what we call the Wildlands and Woodlands Initiative. And so that's a collaboration between Harvard University, largely people here at the Harvard Forest, colleges and universities across New England, nonprofit conservation organizations, and a partnership with Heisted Foundation down in Connecticut. That effort really paints a vision for what a conservation future of New England could look like. It's based on the fact that New England is at the peak of forest cover in the last 200 years, and that there are immense benefits that come to society through the conservation of both natural landscapes like forests and wetlands and streams, and cultural landscapes like agricultural landscapes that generate food, as well as habitat, vistas, and countryside that draw a lot of people to New England. And so the Wildlands and Woodlands effort seeks to apply the science and the historical lessons that have come out of the Harvard Forest and elsewhere into helping to motivate and shape conservation activity that will secure all these benefits from natural and cultural landscapes into the future. So in 1907, a group of individuals came out to Petersham, Massachusetts, and founded the Harvard Forest. It was established with a strong conviction and an even greater hope that by going out and placing a group of Harvard students and faculty and all their collaborators out in the landscape, that great things would come from long-term studies and the accumulation of knowledge. that group of individuals would be amazed at what they help to accomplish. Because the information we have gained, both by looking back and by collecting long-term data going forward from 1907, yields a powerful platform which, applied across our land and then more broadly across New England and beyond, can yield insights into the nature of the environment and the way that it operates, and also into the ways that we can manage it most effectively for society going forward.